With all of the hype for the new Bleach anime, we need to look at why people do not like this ending. Before it was cool to say you like Bleach, this manga was memed on relentlessly, and this is partly because of how Thousand Year Blood War didn't meet everyone's expectations. For the most part, this arc is a solid ending to Bleach, but there's a ton of moments where you're just sitting there like, well,
what the hell was that? Hey, what the hell?
Even among the people who did like this arc when it came out, everyone pretty much agreed that this arc feels rushed. Which is really weird considering the Wano arc of One Piece is 149 chapters, and this arc is over 200. So we need to look at the main issue people have with this arc and how it can be fixed, especially since Kubo and Studio Pierrot have promised new content. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions, so let me be very clear. Bleach fans will agree that Thousand Year Blood War feels rushed, whether you say it feels really rushed or kinda rushed. But the real question is, why does it feel rushed? Why do people say Kubo should have spent more time? Well, what people really mean is that a lot of the story feels like it's missing, and that's the big TLDR of this video. People's complaints pretty much boil down to, where was this? Why didn't he add this? Why didn't we see more of this? So for starters, let's look at Chad and Orihime. Even if you're not a huge Bleach fan, you've seen people meme on these characters. These characters suck, they're useless, they peaked in Soul Society, and while I personally like both of these characters for what they are, there's definitely merit to those kinds of claims when you get to the Thousand Year Blood War. Thousand Year Blood War is the final arc. Final arcs are the time to present the very best versions of your characters. And what does Kubo give Chad and Orihime? Nothing. Literally as close to nothing as he possibly could. They are present in this arc, and that is pretty much the most you can say about them. Chad has it worse considering that this was already an issue for him in previous arcs. I like Chad, I like his character in previous arcs, but once you get into the later arcs like Arrancar and Fullbringer, Chad feels more and more like a side character. He gets the occasional power-up and character moment, but that's kind of it. And it's only worse in Thousand Year Blood War. He gets even less screen time and doesn't even get a big fight. His biggest contribution is that he held off fodder, which is the battle shonen equivalent of being relegated to Waterboy. Now, things get a bit more complicated when we get to Orihime. Orihime is another character that gets memed on because people think she's useless, but I like her character for what it is. She was always the one to help us see the vulnerable side of Ichigo, and admittedly we do get a satisfying character moment for her in the final fight. But that's really all we get. Like Chad, Orihime really doesn't do a whole lot this arc. She goes from depending on Ichigo to actually helping Ichigo, but that's it. She gets that character growth, but she's really not that different from how she starts at the beginning of the arc. And you would think it ends there since Chad and Orihime were memes to begin with. But what about Uryu? This is a Quincy arc, so obviously he's gonna get a bunch of screen time, right? Wrong. He plays a big part in the later half, but in the first part of this arc, Uryu is literally nowhere to be seen. Literally, he shows up, says he can't help Ichigo go fight in Hueco Mundo for reasons, and then he is taken off screen for the entire first part of this arc. And I get it that like, oh, it's supposed to create mystery, like, oh, where's Uryu? But it's also like a third of the arc where Uryu, one of the Quincy's, you know, the big bads of this arc, and Uryu, one of the most important characters in this arc, is non-existent. You don't see where he is, what he's doing, what his reaction is to what's going on. He's just gone. Again, I get why Kubo probably did this, but it's just hard to read these chapters and not see him at all. Thankfully, we do see a lot more of him in the later part of this arc, and admittedly, he gets much better character growth than Chad and Orihime. But as important as he is to this arc, Uryu's role in the big final battle is surprisingly small. If you're not caught up, then don't worry, I won't discuss the spoilers until the later part of this video. But at this point, if you're enjoying the video so far and you found it helpful, then please like the video so you can help share it with everyone else. Now, while we're on the topic of Uryu, we also need to talk about his father, Ryukin. Ryukin is an even stranger case, because he's another Quincy like Uryu, and like Uryu, he is nowhere to be seen. He's even worse than Uryu. Ryukin shows up when we get a bit of backstory, then he shows up at the very end, and boom, that's it. No reaction to Yuhaba, no reaction to what's going on with Uryu, nothing. Deadass, if you don't care about spoilers, Google his wiki and scroll down to Thousand Year Blood War. Everything he does in this arc can be summed up in 3 sentences. 3 sentences. The so-called Last Quincy, and everything he does in this arc, all of his emotions, all of his contributions, come down to what can barely be called a paragraph. To be fair, he does make a pretty important contribution to this arc. But still, it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. You're like, where is Ryukin? This is your son. This is your clan. Why are you not helping the Gotei 13? And you know what? I'm sure I probably sound pretty biased right now. Like, I'm sure you're probably thinking, oh, he just doesn't like the Quincy's. But trust me, this is a consistent thing with the Quincy's. They are the villains of this arc, and they get no character development. There's one of them for each letter in the alphabet, and out of that whole squad, like maybe 4 of them get character development. And this was a problem for me even back in the day. Back before the anime announcement, back before there were all these great analysis videos on Bleach. It was just one new villain after another until eventually it just hit me like, these characters are kinda boring. Like, don't get me wrong, their designs are cool and their abilities are cool, but they kinda just feel like generic villains. Which might not be such a big deal, but you have to remember, this was after Arankar, after the Espada. Some of the best villains in Bleach with great backstories about death and loneliness and so on and so on. You see what they were like before they met Aizen and how Aizen changed them. And then you get to the Quincy's, specifically the Sternritter, and they're not even close. With the exception of Asnot, who gets like 1 page, and then Bazby and Yugrim, we know nothing about these characters. Nothing about who they were before Yuhaba and how he changed their lives. And again, under different circumstances, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But they are the big bads of this arc, the final arc of Bleach, and all they really feel like are obstacles that needed to be overcome. And this is represented in the fact that after the finale, the one thing people want to see extended more than anything else is the fights. Think about it. If these were fully fleshed out characters, there would be plenty to cover and the fights would have been longer. And please do not misquote me. There are plenty of great fights like Kenpachi, Rukia, and Mayuri, but for the most part, these fights feel rushed. And the reason they feel rushed is because the Sternritter are mostly just abilities with faces. Readers do not invest in abilities, although the power scaling community might have you think differently. But seriously, you don't make emotional connections with abilities. You invest in characters and people. So when people say Thousand Year Blood War would be better if they just extended the fights, I'm kinda worried, because I think people are getting their hopes up for the wrong reason. It's not just the fact that these fights are quick. It's that the majority of the Sternritter are shallow characters. So when that's what your characters are up against, the only real potential for growth is whatever they do for training. It's less the villains challenging the assumptions of their characters and more the characters growing by overcoming their weaknesses on their own. Which is fine, that's still character growth. But when you have people saying this arc feels rushed and the fights need to be extended, clearly that's not enough. Now, speaking of fights, I need to talk about some of the final fights of this arc. So if you don't want spoilers, then just skip to this point in the video where I give my final thoughts. But for those of you who do want spoilers, now let's look at Squad Zero. And you know, just like the big TLDR of this video is where is this, where is that, the main theme of these final fights is what the shit. So with Squad Zero, for example, right? They're hyped up. Not by fans, by Kubo, by Squad Zero themselves. The second they are introduced, they start talking about how much better they are than everybody else. So when the Sternritter invade the Soul King's palace, you're just sitting there like, okay, this is about to be some of the best fights I've ever seen. Wrong. They get clapped even faster than Yamamoto. They show off their badass abilities, and they're dead. So you're just sitting there watching this like, are you shitting me right now? And then there's Grimmjow. Oh my god, this guy shows up like he's the cool kid in school, casually showing up after hundreds of chapters, just sitting there like, sup? And what does he do? He goes around chasing this goofy ass Sternritter, loses, punches this guy through the chest twice, and loses. Like, bro, are you kidding me right now? Like, he didn't have to win, but one of the most popular characters in Bleach, you bother to bring him back, and this is all we see him do? And speaking of popular characters, can we please talk about Harabelle? Kubo shows her just to let us know she's captured, and then we never see her again. And I know, there's the light novel, but I don't care. I wanted to see her in this arc. More than any of the Arankar, she had every reason to be pissed, and she gets nothing. Then, of course, we come back to Uryu and Ryukin and their still Silver Arrow. Uryu I'm fine with. He gets the cheat code for beating Yuhaba, and I think it's cool that he gets his revenge for what happened to his mother, even if all he did was shoot the arrow. But what about Ryukin and Ishin? They show up out of nowhere, drop the arrow, and then they're like, alright, good luck, bro. Like, what? And the worst part with Ryukin is he barely says anything. We saw nothing from him this whole arc. Drops one cool line about Uryu being the one to shoot the arrow, and that's it. And I could go on about more examples, but these were the really big ones. These were the moments that really just made you just sit there and scratch your head. So now that I've gone on my rant, and I've pointed out what went wrong with this arc, let me give you the big takeaway before you think I'm just hating on Bleach for the sake of doing it. I have been a Bleach fan since day one. It was one of the first manga I ever bought, and I love this series. So when I say this went wrong and this went wrong, and I say all the things people dislike about this arc, it's not because I don't want you to watch this arc. To the contrary, if you watch nothing else this season, do yourself a favor and watch every episode of this arc. But please understand that despite all the great fights, the great character moments, everything that Kubo did right, there is a lot that is flat out missing. Hopefully, with the promise of additional content, this issue will get fixed to some extent. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. Most people are honestly just happy to see this arc finally animated. But just know that this is why even the biggest Bleach fans don't think this arc is perfect. And this is the one thing they need to fix in the anime to give Bleach the ending it deserves. Now, like I said, there's more examples that I skipped over. So at this point, I want to hear what you guys think. What's your biggest criticism? What are you looking forward to in the anime? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.